All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all very much indeed for coming. We will start off with apologies. I'm aware that we have a late apology from Councillor Hunt. Yes, sorry. I realised I'd heard Councillor Upton, and I was like, wait, I don't think she's on this committee. Okay, and a late apology is there from Councillor Hunt. Does anybody else know of any apologies they want to draw to attention? Councillor Mundy.
Tiago is going to be 30 minutes late, which will surprise everybody. Sorry, Lubna's on the bus. She's on her way as well. So.
Fair enough. I'll have to register a complaint with my local councillor, which is Tiago, to be clear. All right, fantastic. Does anybody wish to make any declarations of interest relating to the business this evening? I don't see any, so let's move on. Chair's announcements. I don't have anything new to announce today relative to what was said at council just recently, so I'll move right along. Minutes. Does anybody wish to make any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting? Again, I don't see any, in which case, let's move on to the work plan. So not a lot to say on the work plan at this point, and that's because the January cabinet agenda, the food strategy action plan has been kicked back to now be expected December 23, which means we've only got 2 items we're expecting to see at the January scrutiny, which means that we don't have any choices to make as of now. So it's always possible that things might change dramatically, but perhaps if somebody gets a real spurt of work done over the Christmas holidays and shows up on January the 1st with 5 reports for us to look at, then we'll have to cross that bridge. But for the time being, January scrutiny is looking like we will get to have a thorough look at a smaller number of reports, rather than necessarily having to be a bit briefer on a larger number as on this occasion. One typo that Richard noted was that the next meeting of scrutiny will be on the 16th, not the 15th, as apparently was previously printed. But I assume the calendar remains the go-to in terms of the correct meeting dates. Right, that's all the admin taken care of. Let's get started. The first substantial item on the agenda today is the Thriving Communities strategy, for which we have councillors Mankonge and Aziz with us, as well as Ian Brooke and Lucy Cherry joining us via Zoom. Which one of you would like to kick off? Fantastic, please go ahead when you're ready.
ensuring that the voices of our communities are front and centre of the council's work. So also we are really focused, not alongside tackling inequalities, we also want to look at the issue of creating a greener and fairer city, and also focus on health inequalities as well. Language really matters, and the language of this report, I think, is much more accessible than previous council reports into this area of work, and we think this is really important. And again, we've been taking some good feedback from communities around that. I'm just going to end on one point before I hand over to Chewe, and that is that Westminster City Council recently removed the term BAME, which I really welcome. I don't think this is the forum to have that discussion, but I want to raise it so it's on the scrutiny minutes. So they've removed that term, which I think is only right and proper. If you look at the way inequalities are entrenched across our city and country, it is communities of colour in particular that are being impacted because they are communities of colour. And so I think it's wrong for us to have this one size fits all term. And so at some point next year, I would like there to be a wider discussion amongst members in relation to how we talk about communities, because how we talk about people is really important.
Thanks, Chester. I want to obviously talk a lot because most of the things you have said it. I did open one workshop that I felt it was very, very good and well attended. In that workshop, we were a lot of people from different organizations, what we are calling partners, and I first saw it with my own eyes. That was quite good. The most important thing about the strategy is bringing out different strategies into one document. This is not an easy document to put together. It's quite difficult, especially in terms of the pandemic. We had sessions online and some are face-to-face. So want to say thank you to the officers and everyone that was involved. One particular importance and what I felt reassured is the monitoring of the strategy. Any strategy, if not monitored, then we are not planning. So this strategy, though it's from 2023, if I'm not mistaken, to 2027, it will be yearly been monitored and revised. So that is quite good. I won't say much, but thank you very much.
Thank you, councillors both. Shall we move, well, unless the officers want to interject anything at this point, shall we move on to some questions? I see a shake of the head from Ian. And Lucy's not on camera, so I'll have to hope that that's also a shake of the head. Who would like to ask a question? Councillor Bailey-Summers, please kick us off.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the report. I've read the Community Insight report for Blackberries that was chaired by Peter Nolan, with the chair of the Leys Parish Church Council. So I thought it was a very, very insightful report, and there are lots of healthcare outcome, talking to the residents about how they felt about their community. There's very details from access to healthcare, opportunity, community asset, cleanliness, youth activity, crime. You've got everything in there. So it's very detailed. And I wonder when this is going to happen for Little More. And I also wanted to know, because this report comes from the health, the director of health, public health. I wanted to know what is all this kind of data that is being collected, what is going to happen at the end of that, and how is it that the council is going to act on all this information. I must admit the report was very, very interesting. And I guess the community from Littlemore are probably going to say probably exactly the same that Blackberries or the Leys or Great Leys. So that's one of my question, but well done, thank you.
Scared to press this now. Thank you, Councillor Bailey-Summers, appreciate your comments. So you are right in saying that there possibly will be overlaps between what residents of Littlemore will be telling the council and the residents of Blackbird Leys and other areas have. So I think you're absolutely right to point that out, because as we know, there are areas of the city that are classified as being areas of high deprivation, and sadly both these communities do fall into those categories. So you're right to say that there will be overlapping issues that come up. We did have, Ian, please do come in if I'm saying something that's not accurate. My understanding is that we've had an initial meeting that was scheduled to take place, I think it was last week in Littlemore, and that conversation, Ian's nodding, so that's good. That's always good not to make things up, isn't it? So yeah, so that conversation has started. I think it'd be good, Ian, if there's anything you could share with us in relation to the sort of key points that have come out from that meeting so far. But just to say, these conversations are ongoing, okay? So the first round of discussions have taken place. We are committed to continuing with them as well. And for any councillors in the room, if you've got any suggestions about who you would like us to include in the discussions, please do contact us, because we want to hear from you. But if it's okay with you, Chair, we could ask Ian if he's got any specifics around Littlemore.
Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Shaista, and thanks for the question. So, not a huge amount to follow what you've said in relation to the continued conversations with communities in Littlemore, Shaista, but I guess picking up that broad health profile and the work from public health. So clearly that captures that local area around the Leys. We're working with public health on health profiles in other areas of the city as well, to make sure we've really got a grip on the insight. And within this strategy, clearly we've talked about the community conversations, the detailed, gritty community conversations, but also how we've used data and insight from our partner agencies. So the public health Leys profile was really useful for us, as of the other health profiles that have been developed. And there's some things in there, councillors, that we've been able to pick up quickly and just start to turn around. So the health profile talks about cycling challenges, for example, in the Leys, and the ability to, and we've already started working on a cycle cafe linked to the leisure centre. But it also talks about access and how communities are connecting with different facilities. So we've got a number of work strands that pick up the insight that we've developed with partners, and we worked with health to develop that profile. So it's one of those rich sources of information that we need to continue to knit together, so we've got a better understanding of community needs.
Thanks very much, Ian. Yeah, no, please do follow up.
Just wondered to Ian and yourself as well. Are you going to involve the parish council, Littlemore Parish Council? That was as one of the stakeholders.
The parish councils are all involved. We've reached out to as many individuals and organisations in the areas of Oxford that we possibly can. We're also aware that often what happens is, and I mean this very respectfully, those organisations that are known to us are doing excellent work, but it's often the people who are not known to us who we actually need to hear from. So sometimes it's harder to reach out to those people. So we're really aware of that. But yes, all of the parish councils are involved.
Thanks again. Who would like to come in? Councillor Pegg, please. And then I'll take Councillor Rowley.
Is that working, I think? Yeah, I just wanted to ask, just kind of reflecting both something that's in the feedback from people who participated in the workshop, and also something that I've heard from residents in my ward who were part of those conversations, which is sort of just what's actually going to change. Kind of my question in a way just echoes one of the things that's noted in here, that a number of participants felt they wanted to know more about how we will actually deliver it, what will actually change, and who's responsible. Just want to ask that question.
Come in. Excellent. So I think that's a very, very vital question that A needs to be asked and B needs to be answered. And, you know, this strategy is purposefully ambitious, okay? I was born and raised in Oxford, and I have to be honest with you and say that I've not seen the level of change in our city that is needed. And there are generations of people who have not had the ability to thrive in the way they should. So we have to be really honest and realistic here and say, the council alone cannot make the level of change that's needed. But what this report has to do, and it is trying to do, is to change the way that we engage, change the tone of the engagement, and also be far more open in relation to the transparency of why that change is not happening, if it's not happening, and the pace of change as well. So we have to be ambitious, because that's what we should be. And more than any other time, given the sheer number of crises the country is going through, this is going to be very, very difficult. But that does not mean that we don't have to deliver on what we are, okay? I think one of the most important aspects of this report for me is that for too long, the council has in many cases been seen as being too far removed from people and communities, and it's been seen as talking at people, talking at communities. And the purpose of this report is to work alongside communities, to work alongside organizations, to understand that they have the expertise. What they need is resources, and they need assistance, and they need to be listened to, and their stories and their realities need to be actually in this building, in the town hall, which belongs to the people as well. So the overwhelming shift in relation to how we want to do our work is what this strategy is focused on. And your point about people wanting to know how things will change, I think also what we want to do is we want to encourage people to work with us to make that change as well. So it's a really tough time, tougher than any other time. So we're not sitting here telling you that we've got all the answers, but what we are saying is that we are trying to ensure that we no longer work in a siloed way, and that we understand that all these issues intersect. And at the heart of this is tackling inequalities.
Thanks, Chester. I just wanted to add as well, as you have seen into the strategy, it mentions that in the leisure contract provision is going to expire in 2024. Before we have another model, we must also understand the dynamic change of the population. So this strategy goes on further to understand what future provision, for example, we are going to provide. It mentions specifically of the conversation that is going on between the NHS and the NHS, obviously, and the county council, so that we can, this is just an example, so that we can understand what we can provide in the future, just to add on what Councillor Aziz was saying. Thank you.
Thanks. I actually had a question on the same topic, so to half follow up there. Do you think it would be useful as part of the executive summary or immediately after it to explicitly draw out points of difference from our previous ways of working or previous equivalent? I get it. I get that it doesn't have a direct predecessor as a policy, but points where we expect to be able to say, a year ago we were doing this. Today, we're setting a course to do this instead. There's explicit points of difference, because I think it is difficult at the moment to spot what is restating principles we already hold, reaffirming things we already intend to do, and what is a point of difference. So I think that'd be very useful.
I think that's an excellent recommendation, but I noticed that Ian has his hand up as well.
Okay, yep, I'll come to Ian and then to Councillor Diggins, please.
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with Shyster, and lots of things in there. If you step back from it, we've got the actions under the people, place and pride, which are some things we're going to do. So we're going to continue to work to improve East Oxford Community Centre. So there's those specific actions. And I think, Chris, your point about the principles, I think in part we work to those principles, and in part there's challenges that we're trying to do. So Shyster mentioned that the first two. What we're trying to do here is say this is our approach across the council, and how do we encourage others to work the same? And that encourage is quite key. And then we've got our grants program, which is on after this, about there's different ways that we can encourage different agencies to work along this line. I don't think we are consistently, certainly from my experience here, we're consistently working on that ilk. So a key point of difference is that how. And that's something that's come up strongly for us from the city conversation, that people really valued, that we were being explicitly clear about how are we going to work, because if not, that difference can be from individual officers, and therefore there's that confusing with the community groups. But to say we are really going to work with communities spells out something that, you're right, we've got an ambition, but I would say it's certainly been patchy before. So I think the key point, that's a key point of difference about how we're going to deliver this. And then Chewy's points at the start about we've really recognised those 4 previous strategies, the leisure strategy, culture, community centre and children and young person strategy had lots of overlap. So that approach where we're really trying to work and connect things. So we've used the language in their whole system approach, but we're really going to work to connect things and join things up and really challenge ourselves about, well, what does good collaboration look like? Easy thing to say, harder thing to put in practice. I think they're really the key things, the broader strategies coming together, the spelling out and being very clear about the how we're going to work, and the way we've developed that on it through the 2.5-month city conversation to check and challenge ourselves before we put pen to paper. So maybe because I think for me they're the key differences in how we intend to work. But again, if you reflect on the principles, also we talked quite a bit in the cross-party working group on this about measurement and meaningful measurement. So being really clear about what that looks and feels like, and recognizing what we're trying to do is complex, lots of challenges, it's multifaceted, and therefore we've got to go into some of this with a real learning mentality and try to avoiding some of the previous things where we've been very tied to KPIs and such like. So maybe we can reflect that clearer. I think that's what we'd say are probably the key points of difference.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So I'll come to Councillor Diggins on the same point. Then I'm aware we have Councillor Rowley and Councillor Altaf Khan and Councillor Belly Summers and Councillor Mundy on separate matters. So we're going to have to be quick and be brief to get through all these questions. Councillor Diggins, please.
Yeah, just on that, I think maybe it would help if places where you're saying, for example, we're going to facilitate this, or another thing where it's clear that we're going to be working with partners on something, could we mention the partners that will be worked with, if that makes sense? So if we're going to work with the NHS on social prescribing or work with local GP surgeries, make that explicit, because otherwise I think it does run the risk of sounding a little bit woolly in terms of what that's going to be. And then my other point on that was, is there a way that we can link it a little bit more to some of those concrete actions mentioned? Like, could we have a case study box of a place that we've done this, or we're intending to do it? Or could we have, what do we mean by making all our parks accessible? What do we mean by we want people to know what community centres do? If we want this report to be accessible to the people who've helped write it, it would also be helpful to maybe a bit more explicitly answer their questions in the report. And I would again just say, I still think that some of the language could be adapted further in the report to make it fully accessible to everyone in our city, especially if we're talking a lot about people who may not have English as a first language. There's a lot of language in the report that I would, maybe reconsider or consider having slight alternative definitions or synonyms in there. Anyway, that was my 2 cents.
Yes, please do, briefly.
So thank you very much for these recommendations. I think they're excellent, and I would like us to be able to go away and look at the report in the way that you've asked us to just now. Just very quickly on the language issues, I just want to be very clear about this. So often when we're talking about marginalised communities, this issue of language comes up, which is an issue, okay? But just to be very clear, there are 3rd-generation British people born and raised in Oxford, and language is not an issue for them. It's not a barrier to why they can't thrive like others or have the opportunity to thrive. The issue is that there is systemic problems, racism being one of them, but other problems as well that need to be tackled, and they need to be tackled at every level. So this is not me criticising your point at all. Councillor Diggins, your points are excellent, but I just want to make that really clear, because I think for too long there's been debates not only in our council, but councils across the country about hard to reach communities and language barriers, and they just simply don't cut to explain why there are just more and more entrenched inequalities every year, particularly in a city as wealthy as this. But yes, I really appreciate your excellent points and feedback.
Thank you. To accelerate our pace a little bit, let's have some questions 2 at a time. Can we have Councillor Rowley and then Councillor Altaf Khan? And then if you could sort of respond to both those points, that'd be ideal.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously very much welcome what you've said, Shieston, as the relatively new deputy leader in Westminster put it to me. It's about understanding how communities think of themselves rather than how they have historically been thought of by the governmental and local governmental apparatus. And you said something about being unduly bound by KPIs, Ian, which I think is also correct. My question was around leisure and culture, and is there a piece of work in progress or to be done as part of this this thriving communities work, looking at how we make our leisure and culture activity offer accessible in practice to the full diversity of communities in the city. And I know there has been work on this in the past. I did some of it when I had the portfolio years ago, and it wasn't, though I say it myself, it wasn't entirely successful. I hope that work in progress. I hope that it can. We can use this as an opportunity to really look in depth in a community-led way at that, and quite broadly, we say enable arts, culture, etc., to provide and promote opportunities for everyone and foster a sense of pride and belonging in Oxford's leisure, cultural and community assets. So while working with the NHS obviously is vital, and social prescribing has made great progress in the last few years, that's not just what our leisure and well-being is for. Obviously, it can't be just reactive. It has to be a service available for everyone, including Oxford's great diversity of population. I'll stop there.
Councillor Artaka, your question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Joe, we're gonna do two at a time because we've got like other questions coming up. Sorry.
I have a question and comment. This strategy talks about the COVID impact and mainly the budget resource. There's no budget, there's no money being put, and the COVID impact and the cost of living is going up and everything. But we also trying to say here, we will try to talk to groups alongside, but we don't have any other way of working or trying to tell them what are the other mechanisms if there is no money available, how can we improve things. And example I will give, also talk about the community centers like Rosehill, Blackbird, Lees, Barton, which are the council or particular parties' favorite area and the community centers, but doesn't talk about other communities or the community places like Headington. We don't have any community center. Marston don't have any community center. Northway does have community center, but Northway and the Headington Community Center, which is called Headington, is in Quarry, and the Asian Culture Center. They are run by the associations, independent resident association. So I would have at least to see some of the council-run the community center and those community association trying to link and trying to, at least we have been saying for a long time, to have some sort of a software or something where all the activities are linked, and the booking system is also available very easily. Because I can give you example, Asian Culture Center used to have 7 days reception open, but now because of the COVID impact, it is not. They don't have administrator, they don't have that staff, they don't have that money, so they can't run like that. So thing has to be changed. They can't be continued when they were, because 1 minute we are also admitting and saying we don't have money, but we wanted to make things work better. So trying to link those community centers. My point is about the connectivity we talked. We had a long discussion at the county hall and how the connectivity of city is going to be seen in coming years, and it looking like it's like a permanent lockdown going to be brought in. So you only can go from one part to the other part for certain times, and certain times on that's a county side. But we were, me and Chris, at the Headington Action, which have been since this COVID impact, talking about the isolation of the elderly generations who are not coming out, who are not on the social media, who are not online or internet, and how their isolation is going to be dealt. And for a number of meetings, they just talked. And it was just like what we're trying to do here is an all talk, nothing, no action, nothing happened. And now eventually, as you heard there, they said we can't find many volunteer people to go out in the community and find and trying to link up and trying to that isolation work continued. So how do we going to do this isolation communities, elderly generations, which is not IT people, and how do we make these community centers? My final point is, yes, I understand government often and the bureaucracy and the democracy trying to bringing up a different term when they bring up BME community. There was another term before that. We're trying to get rid of these terms. We're not going to get rid of these communities. They will be here. They are the part of this country, city, and we have to work with them. And whatever share of that communities, if they are not representative, say represented by political parties in the local authorities are not taking. So the new census data showing this BME previous category, nearly 40%, if you add Asian and other categories into it. So nearly 40% of city is a very diverse. And the final point is about the language. I do understand that there is a third or fourth generation of the diverse communities in Oxford. They might not need directly the language, but there are new communities in Oxford. And even the community who don't have the language barrier or the new arrival community, I would say there's a one common thing between them is that not having awareness of the system, how the system is worked, how to access different activities and information. So that's still a big barrier. Thank you.
Thank you both. Specifically on the matter of traffic filters, I suggest that we keep this the one meeting in the calendar year that doesn't get consumed in that specific discussion. There will be many venues for them to be talked about for a long time, coming forwards. However, on the other points raised by the two councillors, your responses, please.
Yes, I'll go on the leisure. Thank you, Mike, for the comment. The community-led, there's a lot of work that is ongoing, like Shasta said, that is work in progress. There's so much work that the officers Ian and the team are doing. For example, they have talked to more than 25 other local authorities, both unitary, district, and in London, to just understand how they're running their services, how they integrated with health, and the use of their green spaces. I just yesterday or the other day, we were meeting with Ian and the team with the representative from Birmingham. So there's a lot of work that is ongoing. Probably I'll invite Ian to add something on it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think that constant learning, seeing what others are doing and bringing that good practice back has been really key for us. And for example, some of the programmes we've taken from elsewhere, we've adapted so they work for us locally. On the point, Chue, in relation to Mike, you were talking about inclusive physical activity and the programs and such like. Clearly, there's all those things that Chue said about learning from elsewhere. There's some real specifics we're doing as well, Councillor Rowley, in relation to 2 years ago, we introduced Leisure for All grants. So we're going to talk about grants a little bit later, but this was a targeted grant, small amount of money that we match funded with Fusion to really try and encourage, improve access from people who were not using leisure facilities. So we've had a real good range of take up that Lucy will have all the detail on, and that's really just to try and break down barriers, make things more inclusive and feel more accessible. And then comes we've done a lot in relation to those. You talk about culture and leisure programs. In the section of the strategy under place, we refer to the UMOOT. So we've got a range of county-wide programs that link into leisure, such as Move Together, where we've got public health funding. They've invested money onto individuals' leisure cards, so individuals get £50 to access. And we've got a range of really good inclusive cultural activities, such as Feeling Safe, where we're able to use COVID support funding to work with schools to support those young people who had been the most impacted, and to do wraparound cultural activities to help support their mental health. And again, Paula will have a lot more detail because she's on and is leading on that work. So within that section, we've tried to pull out a few of the key programs and work we're doing with partners, with communities to tackle inactivity and inequalities. It's hard within the breadth of the strategy to go into a huge amount of detail. So we've added a number of links in there. But that point about pulling out case studies, I take on board, and we need to make some of that stuff more visible. Not to say we know there's not a huge amount more to do, but there is a lot of activity underway to try and tackle those steep and deep inequalities through these positive cultural and leisure activities. Thanks, Chire.
Thank you both. Sorry, did you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Khan's point. So thank you very much for your points. We have visited a number of the community centres that you mentioned over the last 2 months. We've had lots of detailed conversations, not with every community centre, but we're working to get to all of them. And the points that you raise about the nature of how, for example, the Asian Cultural Centre has changed, lack of capacity, absolutely, all of this has changed considerably since COVID. So we are busy really trying to connect those community spaces with the sort of key strategic work that the council is doing around communities. So those conversations have been really well received, and that's going to be ongoing work. And your points about isolation of older people, again, these have come up over and over again when we've had those conversations in those community spaces. It's not just the community spaces that are seeing this, but also places of worship are also noticing this as well. So this is why, as part of our Thriving Community Strategy work, we've also had a very focused discussion with faith-based communities to see how we can learn from each other and how we can draw that learning out. So that would be my response to your question. The specific points about Headington, Marston and Northway, I don't know, Ian, if you want to respond to that now, or...
Yep, thank you, Councillor. So yeah, recognising the provision does differ across the city, but we have developed a map which is linked to the strategy of all the provision. So you can click online and it show where all nearest activities are. And through things such as our Youth Ambition programme, we do our utmost to try and fill where there are gaps. And again, we've got grants coming up, but we also work through our grants programme. So there might not be a community building as such that we own or manage, but there are community spaces. So we try to use that grants programme to target where the inequality is, but we also use a criteria that will come on to later called balancing, and that's looking where there might be a lack or gap of provision. And then the charts will come on to later kind of show, we understand that, we work through before we make the proposals from the grants to try and make sure that we are supporting people across the city as best we can, but we are anchored to tackle inequality. And that's something that kind of really flows, as Shaista said in the opening statements, through the strategy. The question about the booking system, I think, is something that we are very keen to trying to find a way forward with. We have for quite a long time. So there is a specific action in here to continue our work to see if we can find a booking system that improves access. So taking Councillor Khan's point, we know that's something that we want to find a way forward with. It's quite difficult because we've got well, some fantastic associations who work differently, but we do want to try and find a way to see if we can support that. And Councillor Khan's point in relation to funding, we do say within the strategy that we'll bring things forward where there's a business case. We absolutely need to be mindful of the challenging financial environment. But when you break down and flow through the activities that the council are already delivering, such as Bullingdon Community Centre that we open in the next month or so, there's a real financial commitment alongside that grants programme and the other activities. So as much as we are saying a business case needs to be developed for specific funding, that's more about good governance, visibility, transparency. There is a huge investment for the council that will be delivered within the envelope of the strategy, within the activities that are already underway.
Thank you very much, all. Okay, I've still got questions coming from Councillor Mundy and from Councillor Arshad and Councillor Belly-Summers again. Can we try and be as terse as we can? And that's just because we have got 3 other substantial items on the agenda tonight. We obviously got both councillors and officers waiting around to take part in those items. So with the greatest economy of language that we can manage, which I appreciate, I haven't just done, can I call on Councillor Mundy, please?
Thank you. Okay, so I've got 2 questions. I'm guessing sort of one of them probably be more for Sheister's input and the other for Choe, I imagine. So the first one is, right at the beginning of the report, it rightly points out under design, it points out a bit later on, it's about doing things with people, not to them, in relation to community centres and so on. Now, I just wonder whether there are lessons to be learned in that regard, with regard to what has, the past year. I'm thinking specifically about the East Oxford Community Centre. I don't want to get into a whole thing about that particularly, but I think it's fair to say that not everybody involved there would have felt that they were being involved in the decision making. So I'd like to know, Sheister, for the sake of the committee, to know what your response is to that. And then in relation to leisure centres, obviously it's rightly got some good goals going forward. But I've also got concerns that the leisure centres are not doing the basics well at the moment, or at least lately. I've certainly been getting reports from my own residents that basic things like cleanliness and access to services have been insufficient. So I'd just like to know, Choe, is, going forward in relation to this report, how we're going to be doing the basics right for the leisure centres as well. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you for your question. I think it's really important to emphasise nuance. So it's important to acknowledge that not everybody who is either an organisation or people who use the East Oxford Community Centre feel that they have been involved in the process of the community centre, us having a new East Oxford Community Centre, and at the same time, not everybody feels that they have not been uninvolved. So both of these things are true at the same time. We've had a lot of challenging dialogue and discussion with lots of different community groups. I think one of the main lessons that has been learnt from this is that around communication. There needs to be far more robust and clearer communication. And obviously communication is 2 ways. There's not just the council talking to people, it's the council listening as well. I know lots of people in politics like to blame COVID for everything. The fact of the matter is the COVID pandemic has really impacted a lot of the ways that communications did take place or didn't take place. So I think it's a really fair challenge. And I think also, there are lessons that have been learned from that. But I do feel satisfied that in terms of where we are now with East Oxford Community Centre, that things have progressed and have moved forward. And, the best way to communicate is face-to-face. And as soon as the lockdown rules shifted, once those discussions started happening face-to-face, things did start changing. But, it'd be wrong and inaccurate for me to say that, it's been a smooth path. And like I said, I think lots of lessons have been learned.
Thanks, Councillor. I must agree with you that things haven't gone as they should have been due to the fact that, leisure services, especially swimming pools, have been heavily affected by the COVID. And now the cost of living, especially the rising in energy cost, all swimming pools are actually struggling. And I can't remember at the top of my head the number of swimming pools that has been closed. So going forward, no matter what model is going to be in operation, we must be very careful for how we are going to manage that, because we still face the same challenges. For example, lack of recruitment, lifeguards, and swimming teachers, and of course how to address the energy cost. One thing we are doing at the moment is lobbying the government together with Swim England to put more grants into the swimming pools, because without their intervention, we are going to see more and more of public services being shut. And then whatever model is going to be on operation, I can't go into specifics because work is being undertaken, but I think some of the things, if it is either outsourcing or insourcing, is to strengthen the contract. So we're trying to bring in the user agreement so that we can have greater say, especially the communities. At the moment, I think that is lacking. We don't have much say from the communities, just pointing out from Mark's point of view. The other thing I must comment is working together and in partnership with other people, other organizations we mentioned earlier, because that will going to simplify the funding model. For example, the county council, the NHS, and the GPs you mentioned. So it needs to understand what basically we are doing, and also to see, because we are going to be in competition with the low provider of gyms and swimming pools. So all eyes are open, but to assure you, a lot of work is being undertaken. And this is how this strategy is coming before you, is to understand what we can do better to integrate. Basically, me, I don't call it as leisure. I like to call it as health and well-being, because when you mention leisure, it seems like something important, but health and well-being is quite an accessible word to use because it benefits the community and it reduces inequality. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. Councillor Harsher, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I really welcome this report, and can you hear me? I'm really grateful for all the hard work that the officers and cabinet members and other councillors have put into this. I think it's really important to keep raising the energy and persistence on work that we are going to go forward. We understand that Rome wasn't built in one day. However, I did want to set out right from the beginning that is there a time frame that this would be to get in some key milestones that we are looking to achieve. Secondly, I just wanted to mention, like Councillor Nadeem, Temple Cowley often gets overlooked. Because the focus tends to be on the deprivation of other main areas. And I'm just feeling, especially, for example, just in COVID times from January to May, from 1 to 2,000 parcels of food from Oxford Mutual Aid were sent out just in Temple Cowley. It's just showing how many people are suffering. And now with the cost of living that was unexpected, and all the prices of everything else raising, how much are we going to be taking in account, officers, towards Temple Cowley this time? I understand we've got a new East Oxford Community Centre that is being built, but I think it's quite right what other councillors have mentioned today, that listening and responding to the communities is very, very important and integral part of all city councillors and councillors across the board. I also feel like Councillor Altaf that the elderly, although we had Active Oxfordshire who are actually going into homes on 4 to 6 week programs, how can we improve that? Because we can't just, like you said, pull them out of the river in your report. we need to keep on maintaining that link with the elderly and those who are got disabilities due to the fact of COVID as well. So yeah, I am very mindful of those areas. And most importantly, I see that we already have a list of voluntary, faith-based and social enterprise groups who are supporting the communities throughout COVID. How are we going to tie up with those? Obviously, it will tie in with the grants that you're going to be offering, but also mainly to those who haven't yet been able to be come forward. How are we supporting those? That's another question. And just closing up, Chair. Yeah, I think it's very important that you know we keep getting Oxfordshire online through the thriving communities, and I also feel if there's any projects we can tie in together, it'd be helpful going forward to find out how we can develop that forward, you know, improving it. So yeah, I'm open to continue to help.
Thank you. Before we go back to the councillors, can we have Councillor Bailey Summers' point and then one last wrap up?
This thriving community strategy, I feel, was born from what happened during COVID, the work of the Oxford hubs, but surely it should be linked with the community insight report and the community insight profiles, in the sense that it should be linked to understanding health outcomes and the factor we influence the health outcome. So how are we going to measure that this thriving community strategy is going to improve that? It's going to improve the health outcome for our residents. And then there might be a recommendation on that. We need to monitor that this strategy is going to actually do that, what it says, and how we're going to measure health outcome, the progress on health outcome, making them better, especially for the community who are the most deprived, like Blackbird Leys, like Cowley, Temple Cowley, like Littlemore, Barton, all these things. How are we going to measure that this strategy is going to improve on the health outcome of the population? And can we keep an eye on that regularly from month to month, or every three months, or every 6 months?
Okay, thank you. So just to take both your, to briefly respond to both your questions, and then Ian, please do come in. So first of all, as outlined at the beginning, this is an ambitious strategy. A city council strategy cannot alleviate poverty, cannot alleviate health inequalities, cannot alleviate the lack of money going into communities. It simply can't do that. What it can do and what it should do is very clearly outline what the council's response is to these issues, and to offer a transparent mechanism in being able to measure what our work over the next few years is going to do and how it can be measured, okay? The other thing is that we've said very clearly that we are working in partnership. So as a local authority, we are bound, by law to deliver on things that we need to deliver on, but we also need to work in a more coherent way with a number of stakeholders across the city. So it is the NHS and the health stakeholders, is their job to focus on tackling health inequalities. Is our role to support and work with them. So just to be very clear, that is the kind of sequencing of how we're going to work. Councillor Ursula, I fully agree with you. I think it's a disgrace that in this new crisis, which is now the cost of living crisis, which for me really is an extension of 12 plus years of Tory austerity, that now what's happening is that, different neighbourhoods are kind of scrambling around trying to find money, and they're having to compete with each other. This is completely outrageous. At the same time, what we're seeing is rising levels of poverty now amongst middle class people and upper class people. I've spent time at food banks in our city. I'm hearing that people holding down 2 or 3 jobs are coming now to get food parcels. So the situation is completely outrageous. And really, we can't solve those problems, sadly, in this room. We are very aware of what you're describing, and thank you for bringing it to this meeting as well. We can't sit here and tell you that we can magic up more resources, because we can't. What we have to do is work with the resources we have and work in a far more joined up way. And one of the themes that's come across in this meeting is that of connecting people and communities together with the resources that are available. At the same time, obviously, we are going to be lobbying for more money, and indeed a letter has already gone from the City Council to the Chancellor to tell him that we can't magic up more money and try and help people survive winter, etc. So I fully agree with everything you've said. It would be wrong for me to sit here and tell you that we can magic up new resources when we can't. But that is really the way that we plan to now move this work forward, which is to work in a more connected way. I think your question about the time frame is really essential. And for that one, I'm going to hand back to Ian, which I'm sure will be very happy that I'm doing that. But over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so we do have a thorough action plan that we're working through, and clearly within the strategy there are a number of projects that are underway, happening, so programs and activities, where there are some things such as the principles that we're waiting for the strategy to be agreed before we can start to formally embed. So that's in place. There's individual actions, and with people tracking and working those through. And the population health question, and what's our role in population health, and the Shaita says clearly we have got a role, but there are lots of other people alongside the health service trying to tackle those inequalities. So what we've tried to do is, rather than say we will reduce childhood obesity, we're saying that we will try to get more youngsters to be able to swim a length by the time they leave school. And therefore, that's a more meaningful measure for us and something that's we've got more influence over trying to achieve. So we're trying to do that on the population health inequalities challenge, just to make sure that we're realistic, but we're playing our role to the maximum. So influencing the Health Improvement Board, influencing the Health and Wellbeing Board, and making sure we're really using our preventative upstream services to make the best possible impact.
Thank you very much. Okay, what I suppose we should do now is, much like last time, let's revisit recommendations towards the end in order to make the best use of the time of our various guests. So let's move straight on into grant allocations. We've got a small change of cast here. Councillor Aziz maintains, but it's a substitution, you know. We lose Councillor Munkange, but we gain Paula Redway, who's joining us on Zoom. Thank you very much for your time joining us this evening. Councillor Aziz, would you like to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this briefer. So this report, the key points for the grant allocations to community and voluntary organisations 2023-24. So this report is the first report following the Cabinet agreement to pool a range of different funding streams into one, and the creation of the Oxford Community Impact Fund. The purpose of this new impact fund is to ensure that the fund is more accessible, it's efficient, it's aligned to council priorities to reach more people from Oxford's diverse communities, with the focus again on tackling inequalities. Already this evening, colleagues have asked excellent questions around thriving communities. One of the purposes of this impact fund being created is to ensure that a wider range of people working in communities and organisations who may not traditionally have come to the council for support can actually access the limited pool of money that we have. We've got a 200k budget. We have to meet a £200,000 budget reduction target, which frankly is outrageous. And this is the kind of dire circumstances that our City Council, indeed other local authorities, are having to work under, especially in the current context. The purpose of the report is to review the criteria and weighting for the fund, and to recommend whether or not there should be any changes. We also want to ensure that we can give an interim update showing some examples of the impact of the grants that have been awarded to date. I'd like to thank the councillors in this room who've been involved in the cross-party working group on that. It's been really positive to have all your input. We've also had a discussion around requesting whether applicants to this fund do actually include information about demographics, also provide data and information about diversity of their board, staff and volunteers. And also to explain how they are trying to respond to the cost of living crisis. Officers felt that this would be quite complex to score, and it may also then put off the more grassroots types organisations who are not familiar with this level of, for want of a better word, I'm going to use shorthand, bureaucracy, and it may put them off from coming forward to try and access some funding. So this is kind of the main elements to this report. And we are also looking at how we monitor the governance of the fund, and to make sure that it is being used as wisely and as fairly as possible to, like I said, additionally try and tackle rising inequalities in the city. I'll stop there, Chair, and if you allow officers to come in if they need to, then that's great.
That sounds good to me. Let's take some questions. Can I see hands, please, from anybody that would like to ask about the grant allocations? I will come first to Councillor Altaf Khan, then Councillor Pegg, please.
There's a question about when these groups, whether they're small, medium or large, applying for grants, and there is obviously a criteria to be assessed. Who is the panel assess that? Because previously, I remember a long time ago, there used to be some councillors as well on that assessing, and then I think it's just official, but just wanted to make sure. And who are the panel assessing these applications? That's my first question. My second is there are some different groups, and obviously they fulfill the criteria and get these grants to deliver some of the community activities. And how do we monitor that their delivery happens? And if the people or the community they are trying to deliver are not satisfied with the certain projects, and what are the mechanisms of them telling to the authorities that, you know, such a group had the funding, but they are not delivering as they're supposed to be. And how do we make that information easily accessible for individuals to questions or go to the next stage?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Paula, do you want to come in on that, or Ian?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So first of all, in terms of the panel, we have a 5-stage process. So previously we had a panel that would look and score and make decisions in that meeting, and we felt we've learned a lot from the pandemic, and we've learned that actually working more closely with people as opposed to trying to be objective has had better benefits. So we purposefully in the first stage have a panel of assessors who are as close as possible to that area of work and indeed the organisation, so they have a good understanding. Back in the day, we'd tried to be objective and have people that didn't have conflicts of interest, but we've realised that actually having that thorough understanding and knowledge of the organisations, etc., as the first stage is beneficial. The second stage is a balancing stage by a panel who are not part of that close stage, the initial stage, and at that point, which I chair, we look at a different range of balancing things. So the first thing we look at is a group of pie chart data that comes from the applicants themselves, to look at the balance of communities of identity, communities of geography and communities of interest, so that we're making sure that we're catering across the city and across different communities, but also with a range of different activities to suit different tastes, different ages, etc. We then look at the bigger picture, because the initial assessments are done by the people who are close to that area, and they don't have the overall view of all of the applicants and all the applications. And we take a view of two things. One is, what is the impact that this project will have compared to the impact other projects would have? Looking at the data and intelligence that we have through a range of sources about the current needs in that particular time. And the second thing we look at in terms of balance is there how likely is it that this project would go ahead anyway by some other funding source or mechanism or way of working? And we take all of those things into consideration along with the assessment scores to come up with the end result in terms of scoring. That then goes to the head of service, and then to the portfolio holder, and then to the cross-party steering group, and the reviews, learning, feedback embedded within all of those different stages, including from the applicants themselves as part of the application process, which we have changed radically. So we no longer score exactly what is written on that application. We score the impact that we know that project will have for our communities from our vast range of knowledge across a wide range of sources. And it goes through a lot of different stages, listening to the feedback and responding to that as we go along. The second question about how to monitor the delivery, what I would say from that is, in the past, we had a monitoring system that asked the applicants to prove how well they were doing. And we feel that actually the best monitoring system is to look at and to ask the audience, the actual beneficiaries themselves. How we mechanise that within the current constraints of our budget, but also that of our partners, is going to be the focus of what we call our next Big Ideas Learning Network on the 11th of January. But we do know that there is a fantastic impact from the grants that and all the community activities that's going on, that perhaps not everybody is aware of. And we do know that having film footage, stories, and allowing people to tell their own story in their own way as part of that impact monitoring, it is going to be more impactful and meaningful in and of itself, rather than just data crunching with numbers. So we intend to do that two-pronged approach.
Thank you very much.
So the beneficiary, if they wanted to get into make a complaint or try to give their feedback, how and where that contact is available?
Yep, go ahead.
You want me to go? So I think that there are a number of different ways that people can feed into. Obviously, people can contact their councillors, they can contact and go through our complaints procedure as a council. But I think what we really want to do as part of this new way of working, which is more meaningful, is to make sure that as part of that monitoring system, that there are beneficiaries' voices within that within the way that we measure impact. And I think we're very keen, especially learning from the pandemic, to be really open, honest, transparent as a learner, and literally be learning as we go along, encouraging people to say what hasn't gone so well, so that we can have some group think and shared resources and ideas around how can we do that better as a network that's supportive of each other, and beneficiaries that feel not only is it okay and there is a mechanism to say what's not working, but we actively seek that so that we can put it right in a collaboration.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pegg, your question, please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the criteria that different groups have to meet when they're applying, and whether any advice is given to groups, just because they're so diverse. And I can imagine that maybe if you were a small group that works on poverty, you might not know how to reduce your emissions particularly well. And yeah, I don't want that to negatively impact people just because they don't happen to have that knowledge.
Yeah, excellent question, Councillor Pegg. So this really goes to the heart of the way this new impact fund has been created, is precisely to encourage those organisations and individuals running projects who've not come to the council before. So I'm very pleased to inform you that a number of sessions already took place this year, where we talked individuals and organisations through the process, and also made sure they had clear information about how they can get further information. We found these sessions to be very popular, and on the back of it, we did get a number of applicants coming forward for the small grants fund who would not have come forward. I've also got a meeting, we're sort of trying to just finish firming up when it's happening, possibly this week, if not next week, with a new community organisation that's registering, that works with marginalised women in the city. And already one of the officers is already in touch with them to signpost them to where they can get information. So I'm pleased that that's working really well.
Thank you. Does anybody else have questions they want to ask on the topic? Councillor Coyne, please.
A quick question about, oh, thanks, Tiago, thank you. It was a quick question just about how you gathered feedback from not only grantees, but those that are not successful in getting their grants, that they may have applied for.
Thank you, Councillor Coyne. So again, when organisations have requested a certain amount of money and they may not necessarily get all the funding they're looking for, they may get a portion, or they may not get any of the you know, the figure that they're looking for, which does not happen so much. I think I'm right in saying, yeah, nods there. So what we do is we do provide feedback. So we don't just give a blank, you know, sorry, you're not being successful. We'll go back and provide clear feedback. What we want to do is we want to build relationships, constructive dialogue and relationships with these organisations. As we all know, the amount of money that's available is not, sadly, it's not going to increase, right? But what we are looking to do is to be as fair as we possibly can with the distribution of funds. So feedback is willingly given, and we encourage people to come to us for it as well. And they give feedback to us as well, which is really constructive and really helpful too.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments anybody wants to give? Councillor Arshed, please.
I'm just really conscious of like favouritism to, for example, if we've got locality East Oxford, different locality hubs, and it's the same sort of groups coming forward, to equalise it, how would we, you mentioned, obviously you want, Paula mentioned that you want to build those relationships, which is quite right, but at the same time, yeah, because I'm just thinking there's some new communities or communities who are perhaps not as established, if you like, in Oxfordshire. Yeah, then you would use those advice groups, isn't it, to help them get on board so that they can have better feedback to apply better. But I'm just thinking, we don't want to be putting the people off. So my question is how would we equalize it? The balance of not just the funding, but how would we make justice in giving out the money? Yeah.
do you mean particularly how would it equalize it between sort of more experienced and less experienced applicants?
Yeah, so if there were groups who always get the set amount and they always come every year, but then there's a new group and they perhaps don't know the system as well as the others, although you might give them the training, they might not get those groups. So you're saying, oh, well, to bring them on board, we're going to do it next year, and then maybe we might give it the next year. But how are you going to differentiate between the favoritism of the existing groups with the new ones emerging?
So just to be clear, I think it's really important to say there's the favoritism word is a bit problematic in relation to what we're here to talk about. We do our very best to ensure that there is a fair and transparent process. In the past, there has been a lack of transparency. It's not been purposeful, but that has been the case, okay? Which is why the learning from that has led to the creation of this fund. And when it comes to newer organisations and individuals coming to the council, as I've already explained in a previous response, but I think it's a very important question, we encourage people to come forward. We've been doing a lot of work in localities and community centres and spaces just to encourage people to publicise the fact that this grant fund is available. And we have actually had new applicants coming and asking for information, so that's really good. You're quite right in saying, Lubna, that some organisations will have more staff or a more robust structure to be able to go and ask for money, and others won't. So again, all of this has been taken into account when we are applying scrutiny to to that fund being carved up, which is why there's a small, medium and large grants pot. In the past, it was just one pot, and that would also put people off from applying. And now, what we're finding is that more new and emerging groups are coming along and asking for, they start off with a smaller request for funding. They may move on a year later to the medium request, and then they may move on to the larger request as they become more confident and as they set up their structures. So a quick example, just very briefly, this week I've been contacted by an organisation saying, at the moment we don't have a bank account. We're busy trying to put together the structures for that, but we still would like to come and talk to the council about accessing some funds for a specific project around the cost of living crisis. In the past, it would have been that we would have said, oh, sorry, we can't help you until you've got your bank account in place. Now we're saying, well, let's have a conversation. Let's find out what's going on, who you are, who are the people you're working with, what are their needs. And even if we can't, if their governance is not in place for us to be able to give them access to funds, or at least make it easier for them to do so, we can point them in different directions. But the most important thing is that that conversation is now taking place, where in the past it wouldn't have happened.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mundy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Aziz. So my first question is, obviously, so some of the charities and organisations in the list are receiving relatively small sums of money. I just wondered whether, there's a sort of risk of some of these organisations not being able to go forward, if they're not getting substantial sums from elsewhere. And the second question, I'd say I recognise most of the sort of names on this list, and I'm sure a lot of us around here together probably know pretty much all of them, but some of them I'm not quite sure what they are, and I don't want to sort of go through all of it, but it's just, if it's not easy to work out what it is, I do think it should be clear in the list what that organisation is, or what Duende refers to, for example. I couldn't work out what that was. So it would just be good to have a bit more clarity, I think, if that list is obviously going to be published, so that people can look it up and be aware of what we're actually giving money to the city too.
Can I ask you to repeat what was the critical word there? Because you said you didn't understand what it was, and I didn't know what it was.
Duende. So what have I'll just bring it up here. Okay, so it's Nicola Ashton Duende, and that's not a comment on that particular thing at all. I just don't know what that is.
How do you spell it?
It's Duende. It's in the report. It's listed in the report, and it's obviously received, I think, £750, but I have no idea what it is. And it's not the only thing that I couldn't work out what it was, and just by searching it, Google or whatever, still couldn't find it. So.
Come in.
Please do.
So, Councillor Mundy, thanks for your point. I think it's a really important point that you made, and I'm sure that we can fix that quickly in terms of how we edit the report, but also make sure for future reports as well that there is a much clearer way of explaining who groups are, and maybe even if they have a website. I know websites are not for everyone, but just add a bit more information. I think that'd be great, Ian and Paul, if you could take that way. I think I understood part of your question. The first one was the second one about the substantial sums of money. What happened?
The question is really like, the organisations that are receiving relatively low sums, is there a risk that they're going to go under and not be able to continue if they're not getting substantial sums elsewhere?
Okay, so in the current climate, I'll be honest with you and say, as you know this yourself, it's very, very challenging for all organisations to access funds. It's just not the same environment as it once was. When we're looking at the requests that come through, we're very mindful of asking those questions to try and find out where are their funding sources. And people are usually quite good at volunteering that information already. So we have a list of questions that we do ask. What we find is that smaller organizations fund themselves in very different ways. They've never really looked out for large pots of money. It's often the more established organizations, and you'd be surprised at how established some of them are compared to the smaller ones, right? So, you know, there's a fine balance, right? But yes, your question is very important. We are extremely aware of the very, very difficult, challenging climate that everybody's in. And for the larger organisations who in the past have been able to access funds from the council because they know how to do it, I think they're probably struggling to get more of that type of funding in than the more grassroots, localised community organisations.
Thank you very much. All right, I didn't see any other waving hands, so I suggest at this juncture we should move forwards. At 7:20, it would be an exaggeration to say we're doing well on time, but we're not doing too badly. So thank you very much to Councillor Aziz for an extended edition of scrutiny questioning. Thank you to Ian for attending on Zoom, and thank you to, I think I forgot to mention Lucy Cherry earlier and Paula Redway both for your attendance as well and for your time. We'll now move on to look at the Authority Monitoring Report and the infrastructure funding statement, for which we've got Councillor Hollingsworth in the room. We've also got Christine Cameron and Rachel Nixon, who I'd been promising myself I wouldn't accidentally introduce as Richard Nixon throughout the meeting so far. And we also have Lan Nguyen joining us online. So thank you all very much for coming in. Thank you all very much for your time. Councillor Hollingsworth, would you like to kick off and introduce the item?
Meaning of the word duende. So, do you want to clarify that first, or no, I don't. I beyond my expertise.
I'm assuming Nicola is
a non-internet enabled flamenco. So there we are. We learned something new. Right. I'll be very brief because I think this is the 5th year in succession I've brought this report, and every year Scrutiny wants to talk about something different. So we'll just go with the flow. So the Authority Monitoring Report is an annual report which summarises a series of performance indicators which are based on policies in the local plan, showing things like how many houses we have built, how many applications we have dealt with, what we've given planning permission for or not, as the case may be, and so on and so forth. And there are many interesting things. Previous scrutiny committees have been very interested in the number of students and the performance there. Other times it's been the proportion of affordable housing, but we are ready and poised, and honestly, we can answer anything probably within reason. The infrastructure funding statement is exactly what it says. It is a factual statement of what we have received in terms of funding for infrastructure as a byproduct of the planning process and what it has been spent on. And as such, you know, it's just factual. There's no commentary.
Thank you. Who would like to ask questions about the either of these two reports? Councillor Bailey Simmons,
really
please.
helpful to have page numbers or paragraph numbers for the questions, if that's okay, and also whether it's referring to the covering report or to the actual report itself.
Sounds reasonable. Councillor Bailey Summers, please kick us off.
Page 128, KIFS headlines. Yeah, this is what they are, they're headlines. But it would have been nice from the point of view of our local resident to know where the seal was spent in. For example, 1,511,000 collected in 2021-22 was spent towards infrastructure project. It would have been interesting to know from the point of view of the councillors of each ward which project this money was spent in, for example. The other one was of the 1,423,000 was spent on strategic infrastructure. Some was passed to the parish council, others was allocated or spent towards neighbourhood forum or neighbourhood seal. and 74,926 was spent on administration fee. So all of this, just to say that it's all very interesting, this amount of money. I mean, it's an awful lot of money, and I'm sure it's spent very wisely by the council, but it would have been nice to have rather as a headline, knowing where more specifically the money was going. It's just a comment. Thank you very much.
All that detail is in Appendix 3 in the IFS itself.
A brief answer, my favourite kind. What other questions would people like to ask? Councillor Pegg, please.
I will do this one first because I think I have the page number. It talks about community-led housing and how the local plan says it would like to do that. That is on page 163. But that none of those sites have actually come forward. What more can be done to encourage community-led housing? Because I know it's a very popular idea. I also think that's noted in quite a few different places that there have been mistakes in figures. So one is on page 152. So I just wondered why there'd been mistakes a few times in figures.
On the community-led housing, I think it's probably sensible to say it's two stages of a process. So first of all, community-led housing isn't necessarily a specific kind of planning category in and of itself. So a promoter of a community-led housing site has to identify that site, then acquire it. And there is one which is being constructed, I think is still being constructed in Cumnor at the moment, somewhere on Cumnor Hill. There are discussions ongoing about a possible couple of sites. I know that a local group have looked at the Meadow Lane site on the edge of Iffley. That wasn't for them, so they've backed away from that. But there are other sites that they're looking at, but that's for them to look at and then to acquire. One potential opportunity comes from our planning policy, which requires a percentage of our larger sites, of which we have very few, percentage of our larger sites to be assigned to the self-build register. Now, whether that will work or not, I think will rather depend on the scale and the size of any site that's provided through that mechanism, measured against the aspirations for a community housing group. If there's a mismatch between the two sizes, that's probably going to be quite problematic. But if there isn't, then that's one particular route which might be gone down. On the mistake side of things, I think the difficulty here is probably data is always being corrected. I mean, one of the biggest changes we had to make was 2 years ago when the government just redefined whole loads of things, particularly it redefined how many student rooms made up a home, which was, it's a thing that the government did. So we had to go back over all our historic data. I think there are probably a couple of adjustments we've got here, which are, I would say, down to things falling right on the cusp of the year, and should it have been in last year's figures or this year's figures, we can tweak and adjust accordingly. I think some, because we could do with the investment which is highlighted in the capital programme for better IT equipment in planning, which will improve record keeping. But I don't want to speak for officers on this, but is that a fair summary of where we are at? I don't think it's because we're bad at counting. I think some of this stuff's very difficult to count.
If there are specific data errors, though, just columns of figures that don't add up or anything like that, then
it was just about the fact that there were a few different points throughout it where it was mentioned there was a mistake. So I just wanted to ask.
I think that's good. I think it's right to flag where we've adjusted things, and also to make those adjustments backwards. So I hope it's helpful and it's useful learning from our point of view too.
Thank you. Who else would like to come in with a question or a comment on on either of these two reports? Gaping silence. Interesting. Okay. Well, you don't get off that easily because then that means you get my questions. So I have one on something we do report and one on something we don't. First of all, on policy RE2, which is in the report, this is 5.5 and onwards. I just thought it was noteworthy that, well, it's a bit of an oddball of a policy in that the actual policy in the 2036 local plan so it has 4 bullet points to it, which, to roughly paraphrase, go build to a high density, but not too dense, but to a high density, but not too dense. You know, it's obviously it's not quite that, but it does sort of push in 2 different directions. And it seemed noteworthy to me that the table following paragraph 5.6, which summarizes cases rejected for reasons of RE2. Although RE2 is about efficient use of land, practically none of these rejections seem to be for reason of inefficient use of land. There are a couple where that was the criticism leveled, but the fair majority of them, I think about 10 from a total of 13, were citing very much different things in the reason for refusal. So I just wondered, in view of that, would that inform sort of future thinking about what policies like that should look like, whether that policy perhaps should be 2 policies in the context of future generations of the local plan, and whether we're measuring the right thing when we're measuring it, how it's been applied.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it's not just about density, I think, is the issue, and I think you've kind of picked up the first point, bullet point, which is density must be appropriate and the scale of development must conform. So yes, maybe we should separate out, but I mean, you'd still have this contrast whenever you come with planning policy, you know, the test that a planning application would need to meet. We have policies which encourage greater density in certain places, and that I think is entirely appropriate. But at the same time, a lot of individual planning applications need to be tested against what's appropriate. So, you know, the phrase town cramming is one that people who sit on planning committees it's a kind of an old-fashioned thing, but the notion of, you know, a new building, a development being built excessively close to somebody else's property in an oppressive way, so it's overbearing and overlooking, and a lot of this stuff is quite subjective rather than objective, and I think the majority, I'm squinting over my glasses at the small type here, but the majority of the list of cases there of refusals tend to be those kind of one unit developments, whereas an increase in density to deliver large numbers is probably going to be at a you know, different quantum, a different scale. It's going to be about, you know, additional stories and you know, a larger scale development. So I don't think it's inherently wrong to have a policy which sets out, you know, both an ambition in one direction and a constraint on that ambition. I think that's entirely sensible, and a lot of planning policies would do that. And if we separated it into 2 policies, we'd probably end up having to discuss this as, you know, the balance between these 2 policies. But it's an interesting thought which we'll go away and contemplate, I think.
Yes,
but I don't think there's a simple answer.
No, I'm sure there isn't. No, yes, like looking at the text of the policy itself, it's well, and I suppose the thing that drew my attention to it was the fact that the text surrounding it in the AMR is very much talking about a policy that is looking to ensure efficient use of land, which makes sense because that's the headline of policy RE2. But then the bullets within it, they alternate between talking about ensuring appropriate density, but then also flagging places where high density will be encouraged, but then finally saying, you know, built form and site layout must be appropriate for the capacity of the site. So it's, yeah, it's the policy pulls in both directions, but the AMR talks about it as if it's a thing which is supposed to punish you for insufficient density. And I suspect to a degree the thinking there would be around doing things like reducing density below the affordable housing threshold, for example, which obviously is something we'd want to resist. Anyway, I think I'm repeating myself here and I should move on. Altaf's going to come in next.
It's just
Altaf, hang on. Sorry, I was going to ask my other one, and then I'll come to you. The second thing I was going to ask about is the something we don't report on is the role of strategic policies. I thought the report is very useful in the way that it gives us headlines. Your quizzical look suggests that I might have misremembered what SP stands for, because I always just refer to them as, you know, SP 51 or things like this. I'm talking about the site allocations there. What does SP actually stand for then? Because I've clearly got that wrong. I'll let you include that in your answer. Anyway, the point I was going to raise is I think one of the most useful things we're seeing here is the sort of the top level summaries of actually where our housing is coming from, because we're seeing like good breakdowns of year on year, how much of the delivery of housing in the city is coming from changes of use, how much of it is coming from new units delivered, how much is coming from redevelopments, which increase the total number of units, and so on and so on. And one axis that we don't look at, which may potentially be interesting to look at, is how much of the new development that we see, the new units that we see, come from strategic allocations, from site allocations, and how much of the new development that we're seeing is what you might call sort of ad hoc or spontaneous planning applications, you know, things which are not foreseen by the city to such a degree that they become site allocations.
Right. First thing is strategic policies is a specific thing referred to in the NPPF, which says that local plans can have strategic and non-strategic policies. All our policies happen to be strategic, which was why I was baffled. SP is site policy. So that was that. There's no reason why anyone should know that, by the way. So that was just clarification. On the crux of the question, which is, you know, how are we delivering against the site allocation policies as opposed to windfall allocations? I'm trying to remember if that data is in there. It should be in the 5-year land supply calculation. I'm looking to my right or to Lan on the screen for confirmation of that. Lan's nodding. So if somebody could just pick that up, that would be good because I can't remember what page it's on.
Anybody who knows, please do come in.
Yes, I think it is in the 5-year housing land supply calculation, the amount of windfall versus the major strategic sites. I can't recall where it is in the AMR. I'll just pull it up.
Paragraph 433.
Is that 4.43, does that say? 3.3. Let's have a look.
Right. So in the on page 166, paragraph 4.33. The 5-year land supply calculation includes the windfall allowance going forward. So that's what we think we're going to get provided on the basis of windfall sites, which is 272 units out of 2,933. So the supply from large sites is 2,329. So very crude calculation, we'll just do a bit of rounding. So 3,000 total supply from large sites, about 2,325-ish. So you can see the about 10% is windfall and about 10% is small sites which have already been permissioned, which leaves roughly 80% from the big sites. We don't have a sort of a site-by-site summary, I don't think. We've ever produced such a thing. It might be an interesting exercise to do so at some point. So were your recommendations to go in that direction, I'm sure that the data could be produced in due course.
And does that, so that's a projection of future estimated windfall allowance. I take it that reflects the reality of what you've seen.
Yeah, that's pretty typical, yeah.
So 10% or so of delivery. Excellent. I'm glad that's accidentally run into one of the questions I wasn't going to bother asking, which is, what do you mean by windfall allowance? So that's nice. Accidentally not asked, but answered regardless. I'll come to Councillor Altaf Khan, who had a question, please.
Just a point on this page 150, V4, districts and local shopping centers, in order to help maintain the balanced use. As Alex, you may know, we have this problem in Headington, as this is mainly privately owned, and with the same use like A1, you could have similar things used to be all charity shops, and now you see all the desserts parlors coming in, where there's a better control if like the state shops, which are owned by council, and now obviously they let according to that. So with the private, I understand it's a bit difficult unless it's not coming for planning permission. So I did read this, it says the V4 amended, but how does the balance in the centers, different use, and as the city getting very difficult to get across. So it would be easy to stay in local shopping area if you have different use. But if there's not much of, I think I can see if council don't have much of control over it.
We have markedly less control than we had 12 months ago, because what the government has done in the change to the use class orders is it's merged what were previously separate use classes. So A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, and so on. Did go up to 5, didn't it? Yes, I think it did. And then B1 for office and so on have been merged into 2 new use classes, Class E and Class F. The bulk of those uses are now Class E, which means that there is no differentiation between a shop and an office, essentially. So there is still separation for things like bookmakers, sex shops and things like that. They're in their separate class. So if you wanted to open one of those, you'd need planning permission. But you no longer need planning permission to turn a shop into a cafe or a cafe into an office. And so all the policies that we carefully drew up with there mustn't be more than this proportion of this particular use have been swept away entirely by the government's changes to the use class orders. So we have conspicuously less control than we did. The government is quite explicit as the purpose of that. It is to allow greater flexibility for building users.
Am I right in thinking that excludes certain kinds of corner shops, right? They got their own F use classes?
They are F2, was it F1? One of the Fs. They're one of the Fs. Community shops, which are more than X meters, and I can't remember what X is, 500 possibly, from somewhere else. There are other small communities. Essentially, it's really designed for estates and villages, shops. For places like Headington, Summertown, Cowley, city centre, it's not a relevant policy. There's some really useful guidance on this, which is online. Recommends people look at it. It is very significant, the shift, and given the amount of time and effort we used to expend on drawing up those policies, and it just, with a stroke of a pen, rendered null and void.
As a slight follow-up on that, actually, are any of those F use classes, which are the protected community classes, are they at all subjective, or are they things where a council can make a case for them, or are they very strictly objectively defined in terms of floor area and so on? Is that something which the council would want to have a hard look at? Should these things be considered F use classes and therefore less free to change away to office use, for example?
There are some F classes which are defined by area, so that's an objective test. So, if it's above the threshold, then it's not. If it's below, then it is, or whatever it might be. There's always some uses where there's a degree of ambiguity. So, is it primarily, if somebody was running a community cafe or something like that, is it a community drop-in centre or is it a cafe? And where on that line does it sit? So you can see where there may be cases where the local authority could, define, and the building owner might wish to define it as one or the other, and it's up to the building owner say how they wish to define it, and then for the local authority to react to that, either to support the proposed definition or to oppose it. We think this is something else. Most likely it would be somebody saying this is not an F use, but something else, and the council saying it is an F use. I can also see around some of the what are called sui generis, so these standalone things which are outside the use class system. Somebody might wish to argue that their building is not a sui generis use and therefore they do not need planning permission to operate whatever it is, and the council may wish to differ in their view. But those are the sorts of things which are resolved through the planning process.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to bring any questions or comments on these reports? I don't see any, in which case, once again, as with everything, we'll come back around with the recommendations at the very end of the day. But at this point, thank you very much to Councillor Hollingsworth and to all three of our officers for attending. And we'll move along to our last substantial agenda item, which is the Workplace Equalities and Action Plan. We've got Councillor Chapman for that, as well as Gail Malkin and Helen Bishop. Thank you all very much indeed for attending, especially for attending in person, considering that obviously it's the fourth item of 4, and it is quite late in the day. So thank you all so much for coming and for your time. And Councillor Chapman, would you like to introduce the item?
Yeah, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. It was interesting to hear previous items. You learn a lot that you didn't know already, so that's good. So this is a pretty sort of hardy annual issue, the Workplace Equality Report. Many of you will know that it's about this time of year we come to scrutiny with it. We are obliged under the Equalities Act of 2010 to publish it. All large public sector organisations are obliged to do that. And it gives you information about our workforce makeup, and the pay gaps that exist, if they do exist, around gender, ethnicity and disability. The figures are retrospective, so they go back to the 31st of March this year. So it's a snapshot in time. And I think it's fair to say that the report is quite buoyant and optimistic, actually. I think that significant progress has been made, but there is still more to do. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to my predecessor, Mike Rowley, who was in this very chair last year and in this portfolio, for the progress that he led with officers. Because this is quite a challenging area, particularly coming out of COVID, I think it's fair to say. So in terms of the guts of it for me, obviously there's been more opportunity for recruitment than there had been in previous years, because COVID obviously basically killed off recruitment for a couple of years. So there was more flexibility there. What's encouraging is that the proportion of women in senior roles has gone up quite significantly. That's one of the ambitions of the Workplace Equalities Plan, 50% now at grade 11. The number of ethnic minority employees is also around 15%, which is higher than the target we set ourselves, which is also good news. Still more to do, and the census obviously will set us new targets when we analyse that data, which has only just come out. The gender pay gap has fallen to 8%. The disability pay gap has fallen. The area that still concerns me is around ethnicity, really, because the pay gap has increased, actually. That's partly because of increase in staff around apprenticeships who are obviously disproportionately lowly paid because they're starting off in their careers. But also there's clearly an issue in the council still about the number of Black and Asian staff who are in senior management positions. And obviously if you haven't got many people in senior positions, then you're going to have a pay gap. That's the truth. So that's still something we have to make some more progress on. And I think, in a city where something like 30% of the population come from ethnic minorities, according to the latest census, how many of them are economically active, it's really not good enough yet. So we have to really focus on that. So that's by way of introduction. I mean, there are a lot of nuances and lots of currents running through this area, always. But those are the headlines, and we would intend to take this report to Cabinet, and then we would publish the data on our website. We're not obliged under the law, and I think my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, to publish data on ethnicity and disability, but we will. But obviously on the gender pay gap, we are obliged under the law to do that, and we will obviously do that in good time for the 31st of March, which is the deadline when we have to do it. So that's by way of introduction. So happy to take questions. I'm sure my colleagues who are even more technically versed than me will be able to answer them too.
Thank you very much. I'll come to Councillor Jarvis first, and then Councillor Bunny Summers, and Councillor Khan.
Is that mic is working? I can hear my voice around the room. Firstly, yeah, thank you for the report, and I have a few questions specifically in relation to LGBT issues and equalities. So firstly, it's welcome that the council is doing that reporting on the ethnicity and disability pay gap, given that it's not a legal requirement. I wondered whether there'd been any reflection as to whether it would be worth doing a similar piece of work to look at the pay gap when it comes to LGBT employees versus non-LGBT employees, given that the research nationally shows that the pay gap can be astronomical, particularly for trans employees and bisexual men in particular. The research suggests it can be as high as 30%, although the data is still quite limited on that. Relatedly to that, I think just looking through the report, there's virtually nothing in there around trans equality issues. And given that this council passed a motion just last year specifically looking at that, I think it'd be really helpful to get an understanding of what has been done in that area. And it may be quite embryonic, but it'd be useful to have that. And I guess a much smaller point in question is that there's a description of some of the equal opportunities forms that the council uses with regards to gender. And it talks about the importance of recognising that non-binary genders exist, and then goes on to say that those forms have a binary description of gender. I just wanted to clarify whether that is the case and whether our equal opportunities forms are as such, and whether that might be a very relatively quick and easy step as a first thing in relation to trans issues. I think that's everything I've got for now, so I'll pause there.
I think one of the issues about the LGBTQ gap is the very small number of staff who self-declare. So I think it's about 2% from my memory, and that makes it difficult to do the assessment. Frankly, when you've got so many, I'm sure there are more staff who fit into those categories, but they don't wish to declare it, and therefore statistically, then it makes it really tough to do the work. But I'll let my colleagues comment further on the other issues about trans equality and binary forms.
Shall I start?
Yeah, please do.
So just to say that there are a number of things that we're doing across the whole equality and diversity piece to improve awareness amongst the workforce. So we've got, as you'll see, one of our strands is around leadership and development. And there's a big focus on that, which will be to do with making sure that we have regular comms on best practice. We're encouraging particular groups of staff to network, so that, because I think some of this, particularly around the self-reporting, is about encouraging trust in the employer, and so that people do feel confident to come forward and speak about their experiences. We've got we're just out to tender at the moment for some particular leadership and development for our leadership cohort, and that will include workshops and inclusion. And we're doing quite a lot. We've done already this year a couple of engagement surveys with the whole of the workforce to try and understand what individual experiences are like in the workforce, and that is across the piece. So I think, you know, the networks, the training, and encouraging people to report so that we get better data, I think will help to go towards building a better picture and helping us to build awareness and better behaviours in the workplace. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Ken.
Yes. Can you? So just on the pay gap. Said, if we're looking at relatively on.
Press it or press both of them.
I think that one's on. This one.
So we can have a look at the pay gap is it working? It is. Right. So we can have a look at the pay gap. With small numbers, we have to be careful. In terms of trans equality issues, so in the past, in previous roles, I've taken advice and it's generally thought inappropriate to collect data on transgender identities just because of low numbers and being you can't guarantee the anonymity. So, for example, but we can certainly, I think it's something to revisit in terms of data collection. Trans equality issues, then what we'd be looking to do as part of our plan for the next 12 months is look at transgender issues and challenges. We might be able to do some work internally about raising awareness and knowledge and understanding. Again, because if we have got trans employees, then small numbers makes it difficult. People might not necessarily want to share personal information like that at work. Right, we don't collect, so we can. But I think we should have a look at that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Press the button again. Sorry. Thank you. It's fine. Councillor Valley-Summers, I believe you had a question.
Hi, I was tasked by Councillor Ashad, who was gone, to ask you a question. So what are not more women of colour represented at the management level? What are not more women of colour represented at management level?
Why are there?
Yeah, one that more.
Well, that's a very big question. And if you want my honest view, I think we're on a journey. I think society is in transition. I think from my experience in other organizations, sometimes it's hard to attract the right candidates. Sometimes you do attract the right candidates, they don't always find it a hospitable place. Sometimes there are just not enough candidates to go around and the competition for them is ferocious. Absolutely ferocious. Because the pool at this point is not as big as you'd like it to be. So those are all factors why it's actually quite hard to recruit and retain staff from ethnic minorities, particularly often women from ethnic minorities. And so therefore you have to, first of all, create a climate and an organization which is hospitable to those people. So they feel welcome, they feel they're going to get a good career, they're going to be nurtured. You need to have, from my experience, sophisticated outreach to the right ways of recruitment, which actually isn't as easy as it looks. So it's quite a specialist issue, this. And I'm pleased to say that actually the people team has now got a specialist recruitment advisor inside the team, who I'm going to be talking to soon, and I'm sure she will bring that expertise to bear. So those are sort of almost the sort of societal factors actually that make this quite a challenge. And then you've got the practical issues of, getting the right people to come and apply for jobs. I mean, there are more people from ethnic minorities applying for jobs than before, which is good news. But it was about 27. It's now about 30 in the latest census that's just been published. Now, the critical fact is what is the percentage who are economically active? Because not all of that 30% economically active. I mean, quite a lot of them are maybe pensioners, people retire, people who don't want to work for all sorts of reasons. So we've got to determine that. The previous economically active figure was 18%. I think that's a fairer reflection of the sort of target, because you can't recruit from people who are not economically active or don't want to be. You can only recruit from people who are economically active. So the previous ceiling of what we were trying to achieve was 18 as a minimum over time, and we're now at about 15. So we'll have to revise that figure and see. I would think my instinct says it might have gone into the low 20s, because it usually goes up proportionately by the increase in the ethnic minority population. It doesn't need to lurch ahead. It's roughly in the same balance. So if you've gone up by about 3% of the population from ethnic minorities, your economically active population may have gone up by 1.5, that sort of order. So you might be around about 20, but we'll check the figures because they haven't yet been done. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And I think just the other thing, which is just practical reality, is that turnover's at 12%. So you know, mathematically, it's challenging to start off with, but it is the right thing to do. And again, it just makes, you know, without wishing to repeat, but it does make it really important, the relationship that we've got with communities, because that we absolutely need to make sure that we're getting the right take on our services, etc. And that's you know, a very trusted way of making sure that we do that too.
Can I just quickly come back? I think the figures you are coming is on basis the increase as the settled ethnic minority communities, but in last decade or so, last especially 2-3 years, there's a lot of new arrival communities, and they are quite a young population. So you will be surprised to see the data when you look at it in detail.
Okay. So we've seen the early sight of the 2021 census, and the ethnicity information came out last week. And I think when we've added it up so far, it's about 28%. But I think what Councillor Chapman is saying is that what we then do is we need to then take we need to understand what the working population ages of that as well. And that's what will give us our target to aim at, if you like. We haven't got the working age population information yet. That's still something which we're waiting for, which is why we haven't been able to bring it here.
Thank you very much. Can I take Councillor Mundy's question, please?
Yeah, okay, so just looking at the data on the employees that haven't responded, we're sort of looking at, what is it, it's between sort of 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 not responding to religious questions and sexual orientation questions. I just, you know, when you've got that many not responding, it's quite difficult to take a kind of statistical analysis about it. So just, you know, 2 points really, like how are we approaching that kind of statistical analysis of it? And also, I have no idea how you do it, but how to encourage people and ensure that people feel that they can trust the process, so that they do indeed provide that information where they feel comfortable, or at least more of that. And I do have another question. So we've raised this before about Oxford Direct Services. Obviously, they're not included in the report because it's a separate company, but it is, of course, wholly owned by the council as the sole holder of the shares, whatever I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, point is, I get that it doesn't have to be publicly in the report, but I still think that it's important for us to see this kind of data from ODS. My understanding, when it's been discussed before, is that it is not actually, it's relatively white and relatively male, even compared to what we're looking at from the City Council, but I still think it's important for us to be able to see the data there from ODS. Thanks.
Okay, so in the City Council's previously tried to encourage people to provide their personal information with limited success. A couple of months ago, we did a session around the staff survey. We've got 22% of people in the staff survey. They prefer not to say, rather than provide personal information. So that's 22% of the respondents didn't declare any personal data. That's a less satisfied group. So we had a general session, one of our Let's Talk sessions with employees to talk about why that might be the case. So we've taken some suggestions from that. We've now got a new diversity and inclusion specialist who joined on the 1st of November. So one of her objectives is to look at why people are not providing their data and see if we can encourage people. But this group of people is less satisfied than other groups. So it's definitely a group where we would like to collect some more data.
Yeah. Yeah, and we want to collect more data. We also want to create a workplace climate. This is a critical issue for me, where those people feel confident to speak up, not just about the protected characters they have under the Equalities Act, but about the way they're being treated inside the organisation. I mean, that's the bigger picture here. Are they finding this a good place to work? Are they getting the opportunities they need to have? And if they feel fearful about it, then we can't do as much as we need to do in this area. Having said that, I'm not surprised people feel fearful sometimes about these areas. I mean, there is a lot of prejudice out there still in this country, in this society. And therefore, I know why people feel concerned and anxious about speaking up about these issues and feeling confident, even though we will guarantee anonymity. It's a really tricky area. This, and all we can do is carry on working and instilling confidence in all the people who work for the council, whatever characteristics they have, that they can divulge, confidentially data about themselves, which fits under the Equalities Act criteria, and they know it'll be treated in a confidential way and it'll be used in a positive way, not just for them, but for everybody who works for the council. That's what I'd say, really, in the end. Just going back to ODS, yes, ODS does do the same exercise. It does collect data on the gender pay gap, on the disability pay gap, and on ethnicity, but its route of reporting is a different one because it's a wholly owned company, as you know, of the council. So therefore it goes up through its board, first of all, and then that data goes to the shareholder. So that's the point to which effectively I and the cabinet see all that data, and we can make the comparisons between the way the council workforce is constituted and the way the ODS. Now, I'm expecting that data to be available after Christmas. It will come to the shareholder, and I'm kind of pretty liberal about it, really, personally. I feel that we should be disseminating it as widely as people want to know about it. And obviously it publishes on its own website. It will publish on its own website the very same sort of areas that we would publish. So ethnicity, disability, and gender. By the 31st of March, which is the deadline, which everybody is meant to do this. Not everybody does it by then, but we have a long record of meeting that deadline, and we intend to do so. So that's how that works in terms of, and actually the work, you're quite right, you put your finger on the issue, that actually the workforce is different at ODS. It's a lot of men not particularly well paid, that's the truth. And actually there is not a gender pay gap in the workforce of the ODS, because actually the women who are working in ODS tend to be in the back office or professional areas rather than the front line. So actually you have a negative pay gap with ODS, which is not necessarily a good thing, by the way. I mean, people were thinking, if you have a gender pay gap where men are beneficiaries, that's a bad thing. But you can have it the other way around. It can also be a bad thing, because actually you've got an unbalanced workforce. You've just got an unbalanced workforce the other way. So I think, actually they need to look at that, because that's a cause of concern too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you both. Can I take Councillor Pegg's question, please?
So I wanted to ask about the first one. I think you might have already answered a little bit, so don't repeat stuff if you've already, I think you've covered it. But it's really good to see the increase in representing people from ethnic minorities. That's what, obviously, we often hear at Scrutiny about how we have been less successful at engaging those communities in consultations and other projects. So do you think there's a way that you could take the learnings from recruiting those communities and then use it within wider council work to think about what's worked here and what could work for other stuff? My second question was, I don't think there's a target for the disability pay gap, unless I missed it. And if I am right in thinking that there wasn't one, is there a reason that there wasn't? And on the socioeconomic, so the other thing to ask was, have you monitored in any way socioeconomic background of staff? I know that's not a protected characteristic and it can be really difficult how you judge that, but have you thought about ways you might be able to measure that?
Right, thank you for that.
So the first one, if you might let me deal with the first one at some point, if you'd like to deal with disability pay gap.
Yes, so I spotted that as well. So what I think you're asking is, what was it last year? Because we measured it last year. And last year it was 7.7%. So actually we've seen a reduction in the current year, because I think this year it's down to 4%. So answering that, do you want me to pick up at all about the
socioeconomic background? Yeah, maybe.
Do you want me to do that?
So leading employers do collect data on socioeconomic status. They collect that during the recruitment process and monitor that for their employee populations. It's not something the City Council has had a look at so far. I can't say it's something that we've got planned for the next 12 months. We've got other priorities that we prefer to tackle, but it's a very good question and it's something that we should be thinking about.
Just on your first question, I think it's a really interesting question about the lessons that can be learned from more effective recruitment and outreach in terms of job opportunities versus or alongside community outreach generally. The point I'd make is if you're from an ethnic minority community living in Oxford and you look into the council and you see nobody in leadership from your group in society, you must ask yourself the question, mustn't you? Why should I bother to engage with these people? Why should I bother? Because, you know, I don't see any of my community represented in leadership. So I think what happens over time, if you change the makeup of the leadership and you have officers from different communities working, you know, in different roles, locality officers, housing officers, doesn't matter really what area they're working in. Over time, what happens is that the organisation starts to reflect the society it's serving. And the corollary of that is people then have greater confidence in it and want to engage with it. But if they see it as an organisation which is a largely white organisation or a largely male organisation or whatever, they look in at it and they say, well, you know, why would I? So I think that's the bigger point about diversity in the end. It's not about that. I mean, the government insists on us publishing stuff on the pay gap. It's important we know about that stuff. But the real issue here in the end is if you don't have a diverse workforce that reflects the community, you can't reach out to it. You can't connect with it. It won't trust you. It won't engage with you. Your services are less good. And it's a sort of vicious circle, really. It's a spiral of doing less well than you really want to. And that kind of, if you stand back, you know, in about 5 sentences, is the whole point of this. And that's what I, you know, and the team are driven by in the end, because we want to create the best services we possibly can. And if we don't understand the communities we're serving and we don't have trust and we don't have connections with them, you can't do that. You just can't do that. So that's the thrust of it.
Councillor Pegg, did you want to follow up?
The follow-up was on the disability target thing. I wasn't asking about last year's. It was just that there's a target for gender pay gap and how you want to reduce it, and a target for the ethnic minority pay gap and how you want to reduce it. But I don't think there's a target for the disability pay gap, but maybe that's because it's new data.
Well, we wouldn't want it.
Well, like you want to reduce it. Like, yeah. What's your target for reducing it?
We don't, there isn't a target, but we do just want to obviously reduce it. So there's no target per se. Sorry, I thought you'd picked up on what I'd spotted that we hadn't mentioned what it was last year. So yes, and we do need to add that in.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ballysimas, please.
Very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. And now just to make a comment about why people don't want to answer the question about religion, ethnic origin and sexual orientation, for example, because we are talking about that. I think it's because we are a local authority and therefore we are linked with plenty of organizations, for example, the Home Office. So from my own experience, for example, when I was working in London in the NHS service, one of my colleagues was asked about her name, a routine documentation. She gave the name of her husband, who is Chinese. A few days later, she received a request to provide a passport. She's British born and she's been working in the NHS for 20 years. So I think it's just one example, but it means there's slightly a lack of trust towards big organization to provide all these details. What are they going to do with this information? Are they going to, especially ethnic origin? They can come, they can be migrants, they can be, refugees, they could be, asylum seekers. So there's lots of things like that. I think it's something to consider. Sorry, yeah.
But I agree, though. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why you've got to guarantee the confidentiality of the information. And absolutely, we are really clear in this council that if the Home Office comes knocking on our door and asking for information about individuals to pursue their agenda, I use that word in inverted commas, there would be no cooperation from us. Absolutely not. If they can do their own dirty work, frankly, and not come and ask us for information that we shouldn't be divulging anyway because it's confidential. We're absolutely clear about that. And to be fair to us, there's never been an example, to my knowledge, while I've been involved with the council, where we have inadvertently or advertently done so. But, I absolutely feel, and I'm sure you would share this, Nadine, that supporting the Home Office with their agenda of, how can I put it, discrimination and, frankly, often racism, is something that we absolutely would never, ever want having to do with. I really feel absolutely strongly about this.
Okay, do we have any further questions? I'm not seeing any, in which case that's the end of all the grillings. So it remains only to say thank you very much to Councillor Chapman and to Gail and Helen both for attending. I do apologise that it's really quite late in the day, but thank you very much indeed for your time. It always comes last. If you remind us this time next year that we've kept you up past your bedtime 2 years in a row, then we'll see what we can do about it. Well, I'll tell you what, for Saturnalia, we'll have the cabinet gets to make recommendations to us, and that can be yours, all right? Thank you all. Okay, right, let's wrap up the last of things. First of all, I'll rattle through the report back quickly, because we do have one piece of substantial business there, and then we need to go over our recommendations. So the report back, there's one important point of business here, which is that housing and homelessness have not met on the 30th of November, but they need to appoint tenant, so is tenants representatives the right thing to say? Ambassadors, sorry. Tenant ambassadors, there we go. They need to appoint tenant ambassadors in a timely fashion so that they can take part in the budget review group. So the proposition before us is that Anthony Church, Gillian Taylor and Jerry Asongu should be appointed as those tenant ambassadors, but Housing and Homelessness would normally do so and haven't met to do so. I don't know if any of us are aware of the specific people involved. Are they reappointments, are we aware?
They're experienced ambassadors who haven't sat on the Housing and Homelessness panel before. So they're new to the panel, but experienced to the council.
I see. And I assume per default, we would assume that our Housing and Homelessness colleagues have proposed wisely here. So therefore, are there any objections to this committee formally appointing those tenant ambassadors so they can take part in budget and then as part of the Housing and Homelessness panel in the future? I don't see any objections, so let's do it. Fantastic. The other thing in this part of the agenda then is our reports back. We've had reports back from the Cabinet on 3 topics. All of our recommendations about the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and about the procurement strategy were positively received, which is great to see. The SPD, the Oxpens, was a little bit more mixed. 3 of our recommendations were straightforwardly accepted. That on the relationship between the SPD and the next generation of the local plan, that about riverside activation and how that didn't necessarily need to mean paving over it. about the importance of the Gibbs Crescent access, and about car clubs. So all of those four were well received, so it's great to see. On the other hand, the recommendation about more engagement got a fairly long paragraph, which ended with a flat no. So that was a pretty straightforward no. We don't think the cabinet does not believe that further engagement exercises need to be done on that topic. The Environment Agency status update, we recommended that we should hear whether there has been any change in the state of the Environment Agency's depot and how that relates to the SPD. And the response was essentially that there's nothing further to report since the text in the report, and the sort of to editorialize slightly, I'd say there was a sort of a fairly negative tone there, suggesting probably not expecting progress on that front and being able to make the crossing into Millbank. Particularly noted was the difficulty of relocating the Environment Agency's current functions from that site. And the other one was about Osney Abbey and Osney Mill Cottage, but there was nothing new to report. That was essentially just described as potential future work to look into those ones. So a mixed bag on the SPD. We had a lot of recommendations, and we did at least get 4 of those recommendations accepted. So some progress there. Right, that is that. Because I always forget it, I'll note that the next meeting is the 16th of January, and then recommendations. So here's what I've got down. Let's hear what people want to get onto the list. So thriving communities. I've got 2 things written down here. I've got one around explicitly drawing out points of difference or points of expected change as distinct from recommitments or reaffirmations of things which we believe we're already doing or principles we already hold. I think that one was reasonably straightforward. Are you happy with that? Fantastic. The second one I've got down is about clarity around partnership working. Unfortunately, Councillor Diggins has left, but the substance I took from that was around being clear about who the partners are, and I perhaps add there also being clearer about what is the expected distribution of work between ourselves and those partners, because obviously partnership working can cover all manner of things. It could mean anything from just sort of gently coordinating what is essentially outside action to contributing really quite heavily. Maybe we're providing 3/4 of the money and somebody else is contributing. So it's like that's almost a unilateral action which we're working with somebody on. So, pardon me? Yes, please. What is your third recommendation?
The timeline about thriving communities. So we want the community to thrive. How do we know they are thriving, and how long is it going to take? Are we continue monitoring the work of the thriving community? Do we have any key pointers or key objectives, and how can we measure that we are successful within that? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. On that,
yes.
On that, the action plan on the risk register on page 81 has an action plan being published on the 1st of April. So the committee might wish simply to add it to the work plan to call it in, but not call it in, but look at it.
Yes. Okay, are you satisfied with that we look at the action plan when that comes forwards with concrete information about what's planned to be done?
And it comes back to the scrutiny committee at that time. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Is anything else people are wanting to get onto the thriving communities actions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, in which case we have 2 recommendations to bring around partnership working and around points of change. On grants, I've got a couple of things noted down. There was a point made by 2 people relating to small applicants and there being quite a complicated sort of application process going on there. Do we want to put a concrete recommendation there? Are we satisfied with the response we got in person, or do we want to ask for a written response? What do you think? Satisfied? Okay, fair enough. And the other one, which I think we probably do want to make into a concrete recommendation, was Councillor Mundy's point about clarity of purpose. We can all go home and Google Duende, and I'm sure we all will now. It'll now be a word which we hear 3 times in the next week in the usual way these things work. But yes, if we were to ask that a brief précis of the purpose of a group or the purpose of a grant be specified where that is not clear from the title, I think that would be a welcome addition, and it sounded like something which they're wanting to go away and do. I think that's the only thing I've got written down there. Any other points of action about grants?
Oh yeah, it wasn't just that one. Yeah, just to be clear. So there was one, I think one of them just, yeah.
Any group where there isn't
it's not
tremendous clarity on the face of it. Yes. Yes, let's not specifically call out the one organisation. All right, that brings us on to the monitoring report. So I've got written down here the one point about that Alex sort of essentially invited a recommendation around the role of site policies and the reporting back on the amount of housing delivered through site policies and the, I suppose, the performance of site policies, the degree to which they have been realised. So I think that would be very welcome. I think that would be interesting reading for next year's Scrutiny Committee. That's all I've really got written down as a concrete thing, because to a large degree, I got the impression that Alex and the officers were successfully coming back with sort of quite detailed responses. But were there any other formal recommendations people would want to see about the AMR? I don't see any. Okay, right. So that will leave us with one recommendation on the AMR. And finally then, workplace equality. So there's the question of whether there is the opportunity for people to declare trans or other non-binary identities. I wasn't too clear in the end as to whether there's work that needs to be done or whether that work, has been done. Does anybody have a feeling who's asked the specific questions? Yeah, Chris, please.
Yeah, on that, I think there's a recurring thing of Scrutiny asking for forms to be non-binary, trans-inclusive, and so I think it would be helpful to reiterate that as a recommendation for possibly the 3rd or 4th time from Scrutiny. I don't know whether you noted down my other points on that, but I've got 2 other recommendations in relation to that.
Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I think it'd be useful to have a recommendation to assess whether it would be beneficial to undertake ongoing monitoring reporting on the LGBT pay gap as a recommendation. So not saying that we definitely want them to do that, but given the response we've had to do some work to assess whether that would be beneficial. And I also think that having a report on workplace equalities that doesn't mention trans or non-binary people once is a problem. So I think we should be recommending that report is clear about what the council is doing on trans and non-binary equalities.
Fantastic. Yes, I think those are 3 excellent recommendations. Does anybody have any comment? Please.
Just perhaps to recommend that they in future ask people if they're trans, because currently from what I was looking at, the only way you'd be able to work it out is if you compared what people put as their sex and their gender. There's no, and then it asks if you identify as lesbian, gay or bisexual. It seems like it would be an easy, just people might want to self-identify as being trans.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously there's always going to be a prefer not to say option. So this seems like a very reasonable thing that we should be asking about, should be monitoring. I very much take the officer's point about that you may run into a situation where you can't publish a lot of data because you may end up disclosing really quite personal information about small groups of people. But yes, talking narratively at least about that, I think would be very, very welcome. Do you need any clarification on those at all, or is that all? Fantastic. All right, we have 4 excellent recommendations. Yes, Councillor Coyne, please.
Besides, I think a recommendation that they set a target for how much they want to reduce it by.
Yes.
In whatever time frame.
I think I took away that they wanted to set one. I think, is that right? So yes, let's set it down in writing and ensure that it is done. Yes. Fantastic. Good reminder. Thank you. I think I actually, I wrote that down and then I blanked it. All right. It is 8:33. I think we're through absolutely everything. Thank you all for your patience in this marathon scrutiny session. It sounds like we'll make up for it with a brief one. And I've cursed it now. We'll have a 90-minute discussion about. Yeah. Well, we all have that to look forwards to. Thank you all very much. If I don't see you in the meantime, have a lovely Christmas and